Tim Scott's voice cut through the air like a hammer, louder with each word, trying to leave no room for reply. His tone carried authority, his body leaned forward, his finger jabbing the air as if the sheer force of volume could drown out reason. The audience shifted in their seats, some nodding, others frowning. The tension stretching tighter with every second he spoke. But Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't interrupt, didn't raise her voice, didn't let the storm rattle her. Instead, she leaned back, calm, measured, letting the weight of his aggression hang heavy in the air. And then, when the room expected her to crack, she leaned into the microphone with a steady gaze and delivered a single, razor-sharp sentence. The studio froze. Gasps rippled across the audience. A few muffled laughs broke out. The host's eyes widened, as if even he hadn't seen it coming. Tim Scott's face stiffened, his confident rhythm shattered in an instant. What was meant to be his dominant? The moment had just been sliced apart with words, so precise they landed like a THUND or CLAP. How did one sentence flip Tim Scott's entire attack upside down? The stage lights blazed with the kind of brilliance only reserved for nationally televised debates. Cameras panned across the polished desk, the flag standing tall in the backdrop. The audience holding its collective breath as if every word spoken here would echo far beyond the walls of the studio. It wasn't just another exchange of political viewpoints, this was theater, drama. It's a kind of high-stakes clash where careers could rise or crumble in a single evening, Tim. Scott made sure to seize the spotlight from the very first moment. His posture radiated confidence, his smile sharp but calculated. His words delivered with a rhythm designed to dismiss before they even engaged. He laughed off Jasmine Crockett's initial points, interrupting with the ease of someone used to commanding a room. He spoke louder, faster, aiming to smother her arguments beneath a flood of practiced one-liners. Every chuckle of his was meant to say, "You don't belong here. I've already won." The cameras caught every flicker of his expression. The smug tilt of the head, the quick glances toward the audience as though inviting them to share in the joke. And for a moment, the performance seemed to work. The murmurs from the crowd, the nervous glance from the host, the slight tightening of Crockett's jaw, all the signals suggested, gosh. Scott was dictating the rhythm of the evening, but beneath that veneer of control, something else was building. Jasmine Crockett wasn't rattled. She didn't raise her voice, didn't scramble for attention. She let him run, let him push harder, let him believe his aggression was landing. What Tim Scott mistook for silence was strategy, the kind of quiet strength that waits for the exact moment to strike. He thought he was in control, but Jasmine had faced louder, tougher opponents before, and she was ready. Jasmine Crockett's journey didn't begin beneath the glare of stage lights or with millions watching her every move. It began in courtrooms where the odds were stacked, in communities where voices were too often silenced, and in battles where justice felt like a distant dream. Before she was a congresswoman making headlines, she was a civil rights attorney, standing shoulder to shoulder with people who had no one else willing to take their fight. She wasn't born into power. She earned her place the hard way, case after case, protest after protest, hearing after hearing, where her words carried the weight of lives depending on them. She defended the voiceless when it wasn't fashionable, when cameras weren't rolling, when victory wasn't guaranteed. Each time she faced down a system determined to dismiss her, she grew sharper, tougher, more unshakable. That courtroom grit became her identity. It shaped how she spoke, how she carried herself, how she refused to bend even when every pressure told her to. And when she made the leap into politics, she didn't shed that fire, she brought it with her. On the floor of Congress, she became known for cutting through the noise with unflinching honesty. Where others rehearsed platitudes, she delivered truth. Where others ducked and dodged, she leaned into the heat. Her constituents saw it. They recognized in her the rare kind of representative who didn't posture for the cameras, but spoke as if she were sitting across the table from her own neighbors. She was authentic, plain-spoken, unwilling to sugarcoat. She didn't trade dignity for approval. She didn't bow to arrogance, whether it came from the other party or from within. Her own, and of course her refusal to be silenced, made her a target. Colleagues underestimated her. Opponents mocked her. Commentators labeled her too fiery, too blunt, too bold. But each insult became fuel. Every attempt to shut her down only proved why her voice mattered in the first place. She embodied the frustration of millions who felt drowned out by louder, wealthier, more powerful forces. She was their counterpunch, their voice sharp and unapologetic, refusing to shrink in the face of power. It's this authenticity that made people root for her. When Jasmine Crockett spoke, it didn't feel like political theater. It felt like someone was finally saying what so many had been waiting to hear. She wasn't polished for the sake of appearances. She was real. And that rawness, that steel under fire, became her superpower. So when Tim Scott tried to dismiss her too, laugh her off, to treat her presence on that stage as something beneath his notice, it wasn't just an attack on Jasmine. It was an attack on everyone she stood for, the working mothers, the overlooked communities, people who had been told time and time again to wait their turn, to quiet down, to accept less. Jasmine had heard it all before. She'd heard it in courtrooms where powerful men tried to talk over her. She'd heard it in committee hearings where opponents tried to box her out. And she had always met those moments with the same unflinching resolve. She didn't back down. She didn't lose her cool. Didn't let arrogance define the narrative. That history of standing tall led to this exact moment against Tim Scott. Live on air. The debate had reached its boiling point. Tim Scott, emboldened by the sound of his own voice, began cutting in before Jasmine Crockett could finish a thought. His interruptions weren't subtle. They were blunt, deliberate. A tactic meant to remind her, and everyone watching, that he was in command. He tossed out dismissive phrases, waved his hand as though swatting away her arguments, and even peppered in jokes designed to paint her as out of her depth. Each line drew a chuckle from a few of his supporters in the crowd, but for others, the laughter carried an edge of discomfort. Crockett didn't match his volume. She didn't bite at his sarcasm. She let the noise hang in the air, her silence making the interruptions stand out sharper, as if exposing just how desperate Scott was to dominate rather than debate. But the more composed she remained, the more agitated he grew. His voice rose, higher, his gestures larger, his smile stretched thinner. The performance began to show cracks. The audience sensed it. A low murmur rippled across the studio each time he cut her off. What once felt like confidence now looked like overcompensation. The viewers at home could feel it too, that subtle shift when the crowd stops laughing with someone and starts laughing at them. The host, caught in the middle, grew visibly uneasy. He shuffled his notes, leaned forward, raised a hand to try and mediate. But Scott's voice barreled past him, filling every pause, steamrolling the structure of the debate. For a moment, it seemed as though the night would dissolve into chaos, with reason drowned out completely by sheer force of volume. And yet through it all, Jasmine Crockett remained composed. Her eyes stayed steady, her posture unbroken, her patience stretched but not shattered. She waited, let him finish another mocking line, and then slowly leaned toward the microphone. The room quieted, sensing something was coming, and then Jasmine leaned forward. With one sentence, everything changed. The silence before Jasmine Crockett spoke was almost louder than the chaos that had filled the studio just moments before. Tim Scott's laughter still lingered in the air, his mocking tone rolling off as though the stage belonged solely to him. He leaned back, confident, sure he had landed his blows. But then Jasmine leaned forward, her hands steady on the microphone. Her eyes locked with his. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't match his volume. Instead, she delivered her words with surgical calm, a single sentence that sliced through his performance with devastating clarity. Senator, loud doesn't make you right, and America's tired of men confusing noise for truth. The studio snapped into stunned silence. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Tim Scott's smirk vanished, his face tightening as though someone had pulled the ground out from under him. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came. The man who had been brimming with confidence only seconds earlier now looked caught in a moment he hadn't prepared for. Gasps rippled through the audience. Then came a wave of murmurs, punctuated by scattered applause. The host's eyes widened, his hand frozen mid-gesture as if even he had been blindsided by the precision of Crockett's strike. The entire energy of the room shifted from Scott's dominance to Crockett's command. Scott tried to recover, forced a chuckle, adjusted his tie, leaned into the mic as though ready to push back. But the words stumbled out, disjointed, more defensive than persuasive. His timing faltered, his rhythm broken. The audience heard it, felt it, the undeniable crack in his armor. Meanwhile, Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't press further. She simply leaned back in her chair, letting the weight of her sentence settle over the room. It was the confidence of someone who knew the truth didn't need to be shouted, only needed to be said, and as those words echoed, the outside world was already reacting. Within minutes, Twitter lit up with clips of the moment. Hashtags began to surge. Hashtag noise is not truth. Hashtag Crockett mic drop. Hashtag Tim stunned. One viral tweet read, Jasmine Crockett just ended Tim Scott with one sentence. One sentence. Another posted the freeze frame of his reaction with the caption, when the truth finally hits you. Memes began spreading in real time. Someone looped Scott's stunned expression into a GIF with the text, when you thought you were winning the argument, but she brings facts and fire. Die. TikToks remixed the moment with dramatic music, each one gaining thousands of views by the minute. Even celebrities began chiming in, comedians joking that Crockett deserved her own late-night show, activists praising her for saying what so many felt but rarely heard on such a stage. Back in the studio, the host finally regained his composure, trying to steer the debate forward, but it was too late. The narrative had shifted. Everyone watching, both in the room and across the nation, knew they had witnessed the turning point. Scott kept talking, but the energy had drained from his words. Crockett had not only silenced him, she had reframed the entire conversation. With a single line, the brilliance of it wasn't just in the sting of the words, but in the deeper truth they carried. Americans everywhere could see themselves in that sentence, exhausted by the endless shouting, the constant noise, the theatrics that passed for leadership. Crockett's words pierced through because they weren't just about Scott. They were about every politician who mistook volume for vision. And as the debate continued, the audience inside the studio leaned forward, no longer hanging on Scott's every word, but waiting for Jasmine's next. The applause lines now belonged to her. The murmurs of agreement echoed with her points. The tide had turned, not gradually, but instantly, in one unforgettable sentence. By the time the broadcast ended, the internet had already crowned its victor. Comment sections overflowed with praise for Crockett. Commentators declared it the standout moment of the debate. Headlines forming for the next morning practically wrote themselves. Crockett stuns Scott with one line. Tim Scott's attempt at recovery couldn't erase what millions had just witnessed. His stumble wasn't just verbal, it was symbolic. In a political landscape too often dominated by arrogance and noise, Jasmine Crockett had shown the power of composure, of precision, of truth spoken plainly. And that was the brilliance of the mic drop. It wasn't a rant, it wasn't a tirade. It was one line, calm, sharp, undeniable, that left a lasting mark. But the shockwaves didn't stop in the studio. They exploded across America the moment Jasmine Crockett delivered her one-line takedown of Tim Scott. The studio may have erupted, but the real aftershocks were felt far beyond those walls. Within minutes of the broadcast, the internet was ablaze. Phones buzzed, timelines flooded, and hashtags surged. At the top of the list, hashtag Crockett stuns Scott clips of the moment spread like wildfire across Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. Every angle of Scott's stunned silence was replayed, slowed down, zoomed in. One user posted the freeze frame of his face with the caption, "When you realize the volume knob doesn't equal victory." Another racked up hundreds of thousands of likes with, "Jasmine Crockett just said what every American sitting at home has wanted to scream at their TV." Memes poured in by the second. Someone paired his wide-eyed expression with the caption, "Error 404, comeback not found." Another put his face on a movie poster titled, "The Silence of the Senator." TikTok creators stitched the moment into dance, trends, comedic skits, even motivational edits. The line, "loud doesn't make you right," was looped into remixes. Already becoming a cultural refrain, late-night comedians wasted no time. By the next evening, Scott's frozen reaction became the punchline of monologues coast to coast. One joked, Tim Scott discovered last night that noise canceling works both ways. Another quipped, Jasmine Crockett just reminded America that the mute button still exists. The audience roared, the laughter cementing what millions had already decided. Scott had lost control and Crockett had claimed the night. But it wasn't just comedy. Politicians and pundits weighed in too. Progressive voices hailed the moment as proof that dignity and calm could disarm arrogance. That's how you debate, one congresswoman tweeted. Precision, not pandemonium. On the other side, conservative commentators scrambled, some insisting Scott was caught off guard, others trying to downplay the exchange entirely. But the fact that they had to respond at all showed the scale of Crockett's impact. News outlets joined in, headlines blazing across homepages. Crockett stuns Scott with viral one-liner, the sentence that silenced the debate. Even mainstream anchors, usually restrained, couldn't resist playing the clip on loop, dissecting the power of her delivery, the symbolism of her calm against his aggression. By then, the hashtag had become more than a trend. It was a movement. Supporters posted videos of themselves repeating Crockett's line in solidarity. Teachers used it as a metaphor in classrooms. Parents shared it as advice for their kids. The phrase was no longer about one debate stage, it was about the culture at large. A rejection of arrogance disguised as leadership. And Scott. His silence was louder than anything he'd said that night. Each attempt to spin or explain fell, flat, overshadowed by the endless loop of his frozen expression. The internet had chosen its symbol, Crockett, as the embodiment of composure and truth. Scott as the image of arrogance exposed. It was more than a viral moment. It was proof of how quickly power could shift in the modern age. How one sentence, delivered with clarity, could ripple across the nation, cutting through the noise faster than any shouting match ever could. But beyond the laughter and trending hashtags, there was a deeper truth. The viral explosion was entertaining memes. Hashtags, comedians, and headlines turning the moment into a cultural spectacle. But to frame Jasmine Crockett's response as just a clapback or a meme would be to miss the heart of what happened. Her calm, deliberate sentence wasn't about scoring internet points or embarrassing an opponent. It was about exposing the hollow core of arrogance and showing that truth, spoken with dignity, is stronger than noise delivered with fury. What unfolded that night wasn't ego against ego, it was ego versus integrity. Scott had relied on volume, interruption, and theatrics, assuming that dominance equaled persuasion. Crockett countered with something deceptively simple, restraint. She didn't match his tone. She didn't shout over him. She didn't let his storm dictate her voice. Instead, she anchored herself in truth. And in doing so, she revealed that arrogance is brittle. It cracks in the face of calm certainty. This wasn't just a victory in a debate. It was a reminder of a larger principle, one that stretches far beyond politics. In workplaces, classrooms, communities, and families, there are always voices that confuse loudness with leadership. We've all seen it. The colleague who dominates the room with bluster but offers no solutions. The official who shouts down critics but avoids accountability. The public figure who performs for applause but evades substance for too long. People have mistaken performance for power. Jasmine's moment punctured that illusion. The deeper lesson was this: truth doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to drown others out. Truth simply needs to stand its ground, spoken clearly without fear. That's why her line reverberated so widely. It wasn't a zinger. It was a mirror held up to an entire culture of noise. Millions recognized themselves in that moment. The times they stayed silent while arrogance ran the room. The times they wished for words that could cut through chaos without adding to it. Crockett gave that wish a voice. And in the context of democracy, the lesson sharpens. Democracy is supposed to be a system where reasoned debate shapes collective decisions, where ideas rise and fall on merit, not on the volume of their delivery. But in an age where shouting dominates headlines and outrage fuels algorithms, the temptation is strong to equate anger with authenticity. Crockett's restraint was more than personal discipline. It was a defense of democracy's very spirit. She reminded us that dignity, not disruption, is what keeps dialogue alive. Integrity is quiet but unshakable. Dignity is soft-spoken but immovable. These are the forces that ultimately outlast the noise. Arrogance may trend, but truth endures. And in that debate hall, the endurance belonged to Jasmine Crockett. Yet the moral doesn't end with her. Because, as powerful as her moment was, it also raised a question for everyone watching. What do we do when arrogance confronts us? Do we shrink back? Do we fight fire with fire? Or do we, like Crockett, plant our feet in calm conviction and let truth do the work? That's why her one sentence wasn't just hers. It belonged to the millions who saw it and felt a spark of courage. It belonged to every teacher who tries to silence arrogance with knowledge, to every worker who insists on fairness over favoritism, to every citizen who refuses to be bullied by spectacle when substance is at stake. The debate stage became a stage for something bigger, a reminder that noise cannot replace truth, and that integrity, even in a single sentence, can change the course of a conversation, a community, even a country. And millions watching realized, this isn't Jasmine's fight alone, it's ours. Tim Scott came into that debate armed with bluster, interruptions, and the confidence of a politician used to taking the floor by force. For much of the night, he seemed convinced that volume could outshine vision, that noise could overwhelm nuance. But then came that one sentence delivered with calm. Sharpened by conviction, anchored in truth, it cut through the chaos. It silenced the interruptions. It flipped the balance of power in the room. In that moment, Jasmine Crockett didn't just win in exchange. She won something larger, the respect of a nation that recognized the difference between arrogance and authenticity. And that's why the moment mattered. It wasn't about who got the last word. It was about who stood for something greater. Crockett's line didn't linger because it was clever, it lingered because it was true. It reminded us that dignity, even when challenged, can still hold. The final say. The title tells the story plainly. Jasmine Crockett stuns Tim Scott with one sentence. Watch the reaction. And now, you've seen exactly why that headline exploded across screens, hashtags, and living rooms. It wasn't just the sentence. It was the reaction it revealed. The stunned silence of a man who thought noise would carry him, and the collective gasp of millions who saw dignity push back and prevail. But here's the thing. This story doesn't end on that stage. It doesn't end with Tim Scott frozen in silence or Jasmine Crockett standing tall. It carries forward into every conversation we have about politics, leadership, and the future of democracy. It asks us, do we reward arrogance or do we amplify truth? Do we fall for spectacle or do we demand substance? That's where you come in. If you felt the power of Jasmine Crockett's stand, if you believe that truth deserves the spotlight over noise, and don't let this moment fade into another viral clip. Be part of the community that keeps truth alive, that keeps dignity at the center of debate, that refuses to let arrogance drown out authenticity. Here's how. Spread it to your friends, your family, your social circles, because every time it's shared, that lesson travels further. That calm truth is stronger than loud arrogance. Join this channel if you stand with voices that refuse to be silenced. It's voices that rise above the shouting to speak for democracy, integrity, and dignity. Every subscription isn't just a number. It's a statement that you value substance over spectacle. Comment with your thoughts, your reactions, your own experiences of seeing arrogance undone by truth. Because this channel isn't just about telling stories, it's about building a space where truth has an audience that refuses to back down. We've watched one moment transform into a movement before our eyes. A single sentence flipped an entire exchange upside down and echoed across America. That's the power of truth when it's spoken with conviction. And that's the power we need to keep alive.
Together.
So let's make this clear. Jasmine Crockett's fight isn't just hers. It belongs to all of us who believe in dignity, who believe in integrity, who believe that even in a storm of noise, truth still has the power to stand tall. If you believe that too, don't just watch. Take action. Share this story. Subscribe to this channel Stand with truth. Because when arrogance tries to shout us down, one calm sentence can still change everything.